A few winters ago, a retired long-haul trucker named Dale was living in his Ford Transit, parked on the same street in Phoenix, Arizona, more or less every night for 3 years. That van was his home. In that time, the sedan 2 spaces down from him collected 11 parking tickets and got towed twice. Dale got 0 tickets, not one, and he wasn't sneaking around or bribing anyone. He'd simply spent one afternoon at the public library reading the city's parking code, and he discovered something that changed everything. Almost every ticket written against a parked van is only valid if the city follows its own rules to the letter. And there are 5 completely legal ways to make sure those rules work for you instead of against you. The people society calls homeless, though most of them call themselves vehicle dwellers, figured this out years ago out of pure necessity. Most drivers never learn it in their entire lives. Today, I'm walking you through all 5 methods in plain English, including the court ruling that quietly gutted the most common enforcement trick in America. But before we open the first door, you need to see how one parking ticket actually becomes a catastrophe. Because once you watch that math play out, you'll understand why this knowledge matters so much. Here's the uncomfortable arithmetic of a single piece of paper under a windshield wiper. A parking ticket for overstaying a limit runs somewhere between $40 and $75 in most American cities. Ignore it for 30 days and it doubles. Collect a handful of unpaid tickets, and in many cities your vehicle goes on a boot list, which means one morning you wake up to a bright yellow clamp on your front wheel. Then comes the tow, which costs $150 to $300 just for the hook, and then the impound lot starts charging $40 to $100 for every single day the vehicle sits there. If you remember my video on abandoned vans, you already know how that story ends. The fees pass the value of the vehicle, the owner walks away, and the van gets sold at a lien auction. Now imagine that vehicle is your home. For someone living in a van, a $65 ticket that goes unhandled isn't an annoyance. It's the first domino in a chain that ends with losing everything they own, including the roof over their head. That is exactly why vehicle dwellers became the world's leading experts on parking law. They had no choice. And the system they learned to navigate is far more mechanical, far more predictable, and far more beatable than anyone suspects. So let's open door number 1. Method 1. Mastering the 72-hour clock. In most American cities, there's an ordinance that says a vehicle cannot remain parked in the same spot on a public street for more than 72 hours. Some cities say 48, a few say 24 in certain zones, but 72 is the most common number in the country. This is the rule behind the majority of tickets and tows involving vans. And here's the part most drivers never think about. The city has to prove the vehicle didn't move. Think about that for a second. An officer drives past your van on Tuesday and again on Friday. It's in the same spot. But how do they prove it sat there the whole time and didn't leave for groceries and come back? For decades, the answer was chalk. A parking officer would swipe a chalk mark on your tire, and if the mark was still in the same position days later, that was their evidence. Then in 2019, a federal appeals court in a case out of Saginaw, Michigan, ruled that chalking a tire is a physical trespass on private property for the purpose of gathering evidence, which makes it a warrantless search under the Fourth Amendment. A woman named Allison Taylor, who had received more than a dozen chalk-based tickets, took the city to court and won. Cities in several states had to abandon the practice overnight, and cities everywhere else got nervous about it. These days, enforcement mostly relies on photographing your valve stems, the little air nozzles on your wheels, because if the wheel hasn't rotated, the valve stems sit in the exact same position in both photos, and that tells you precisely how to stay legal. You drive the vehicle. Not push it forward 3 feet, actually drive it around the block or to a different street before the clock runs out. People who live in their vans keep a simple habit of moving every second or third day, and often keep a small notebook on the dashboard logging the date and street, which becomes handy evidence if a ticket ever gets written in error. One more wrinkle worth knowing. Some cities specify how far the vehicle has to move to reset the clock. San Francisco, for instance, has historically required moving at least one block or a set number of feet, while other cities just require that the vehicle demonstrably left the spot. Your city's number is sitting in the municipal code under a heading like abandoned vehicles or 72-hour parking, and it takes about 10 minutes at the library or on the city website to find it. The experienced vehicle dwellers turn this into a routine. They pick 3 or 4 quiet streets in a rotation, the way a farmer rotates fields, and simply cycle between them every couple of days. No single neighbor ever sees the van long enough to get annoyed. No officer ever gets 2 matching photographs, and the whole threat of the 72-hour rule evaporates into a Tuesday errand. The 72-hour rule sounds like a trap. Handled correctly, it's just a calendar. But the street is only one place to park, and the next method removes the city's authority from the equation almost entirely. Method 2, the private property umbrella. Here is a legal distinction that almost nobody outside the vehicle-dwelling world ever stops to think about. City parking ordinances, the time limits, the overnight bans, the permit zones apply to public streets and public lots. On private property, with the owner's permission, most of those rules simply do not reach you. A van parked in a private lot with the blessing of whoever controls that lot is, in the eyes of the parking code, invisible. This is why the great American tradition of sleeping at Walmart exists. For decades, many Walmart stores have allowed overnight parking at the manager's discretion, partly because founder Sam Walton liked RV travelers and partly because a traveler who sleeps in the lot buys breakfast in the store. Cracker Barrel restaurants famously welcome overnighters and even mark dedicated RV spaces at many locations. Casinos are one of the best-kept secrets in this world, because a casino with a big lot would love nothing more than for you to park free all night and wander inside for the buffet. Truck stops, like the big travel plazas, have designated overnight areas built into their business model. And then there's the quiet genius move that vehicle dwellers discovered years ago, the cheap 24-hour gym membership. For roughly $10 to $15 a month, a national gym chain gives you a hot shower every day of the year, and a completely legitimate reason to be parked in their lot at any hour. One monthly payment, smaller than a single parking ticket, solves hygiene and parking in one stroke. The rule that separates the people who do this smoothly from the people who get hassled is simple. Ask first, walk in, find the manager, and ask if it's all right to park overnight. The overwhelming majority of the time, at the right kinds of businesses, the answer is yes. And now the night security guard has been told about you instead of calling about you. There's also an older version of this method that predates every parking lot in America, which is knocking on the door of a church. Pastors say yes to a polite request more often than you'd ever guess, and some of them said yes so many times that entire cities took notice. Which brings us to method 3. Because what started as informal church lot arrangements has grown into an official system most drivers have never heard of. Method 3. The safe parking programs. Beginning in Santa Barbara, California, back in 2004, cities started doing something surprisingly sensible. Instead of ticketing people who sleep in vehicles, they designated specific lots, usually owned by churches, nonprofits, or the city itself, where sleeping in your vehicle overnight is officially sanctioned. You register with the program, you show the vehicle is registered and insured, and you receive what amounts to a permit. The lot typically has a bathroom, sometimes security, and the police know exactly what that lot is, which means nobody knocks on your window at 2 a.m. These programs now operate in dozens of cities across the country, from San Diego and San Jose to Seattle, Denver, and smaller towns you'd never expect. Some are run by churches with a dozen spaces. Some are large municipal lots with caseworkers on site who help people get back into housing. And finding them costs nothing but a phone call. In most of the country, dialing 211 connects you to a local social services line, and asking about safe parking programs in your area gets you a current list. Now, most people watching this video will never need a safe parking lot, and I hope you never do. But knowing this system exists changes how you see every van parked on a quiet street. And if life ever throws you or someone you love a hard year, This is the phone number that keeps a rough patch from becoming a catastrophe. Let me show you how these programs actually play out in real life. A widower in his 60s out in San Diego lost his apartment when the rent jumped after his wife passed, and he moved into their old Chevy conversion van rather than burden his daughter. For the first month, he parked on streets, collected 3 tickets, and barely slept for worrying about the knock on the window. Then a librarian told him about the 211 line. 2 phone calls later, he had a spot in a church lot with a restroom 40 feet from his door, a security light overhead, and a caseworker who eventually helped him land a senior apartment. His total tickets from that day forward, 0. The 3 tickets from before, he contested 2 of them on signage grounds and won both, which is a preview of Method 5. The system didn't just stop punishing him. Once he knew where the doors were, it started working in his favor. Now, one practical matter before the last 2 methods, because it's the detail that gets more van sleepers ticketed than anything else: cold. When the temperature drops, the natural instinct is to run the engine for heat, and an idling van at 3 a.m. is exactly what gets noticed, reported, and cited. Since many cities have idling ordinances on top of everything else, it also burns fuel you paid for and puts hours on an engine you need. The experienced folks solve this problem for about the price of a tank of gas. There's a Terra shell in my glove box for exactly this. It's a sealed thermal bivvy that packs down to about the size of a soda can, and it works by bouncing your own body heat straight back at you. Nothing to plug in, nothing to burn, nothing running, and nothing making a sound. The van stays cold, dark, and quiet, which is exactly how a parked van stays invisible, and you stay warm until sunrise. If you ever sleep in a vehicle, or just drive an older one through winter, it costs about what one parking ticket does, and it solves a much bigger problem. I've put the link in the description. All right, back to the methods, because the 4th one involves 245 million acres where parking tickets literally cannot exist. Method 4, the public land reset. Every method so far assumes you're staying in a city, but the federal government owns enormous stretches of this country, and on much of it, you're allowed to park and sleep completely free. Land managed by the Bureau of Land Management, concentrated across the western states, allows what's called dispersed camping, which means you find a spot off an established road and simply stay there. The standard rule is 14 days free within any 28-day period, after which you move roughly 25 miles and the clock starts again. National forests operate under similar rules, generally allowing 14 to 16 days in one spot. And these are the same rules the snowbirds have quietly used for decades. The retirees in RVs who drift toward the Arizona desert every winter and park for free on land most Americans don't even know they own. No fees, no reservations, no meters, and no parking enforcement officer within 50 miles, because there's nothing to enforce. Vehicle dwellers use this as a reset valve. 2 weeks in the desert or the forest costs nothing but fuel, and during those 2 weeks the possibility of a parking ticket is 0. Then there are highway rest areas which occupy a middle ground worth understanding. Rules vary sharply by state. Some states allow stays of 8 hours, some allow 24, a few prohibit overnight parking entirely, and the limit is posted on a sign at the entrance of nearly every rest area in America. Reading that sign takes 10 seconds and tells you exactly what you're entitled to. The pattern across this whole method is the same one running through this entire video. The rules are written down, they're public, and the people who bother to read them stop getting surprised. But sometimes, despite doing everything right, a ticket still lands on the windshield. And that's where Method 5 comes in, because a written ticket is the beginning of a process, not the end of one. Method 5, beating the ticket after it's written. A parking ticket is not a verdict. In almost every city, it's a civil claim. And like any claim, the city has to prove it, which means the ticket dies if the city got its own procedure wrong. And you would be amazed how often it does. Start with signage. For a parking restriction to be enforceable, the sign communicating it generally has to exist, be visible, and be positioned according to the city's own standards. Vehicle dwellers learned long ago to photograph the entire block the moment a ticket appears. A sign hidden behind a tree branch. A sign twisted to face the wrong direction. A missing sign at the entrance to a restricted zone. Faded curb paint where the red or yellow has worn to bare concrete. Any of these can sink a ticket. Then there are the errors on the ticket itself. A wrong license plate digit, a wrong street name, a vehicle described as the wrong color or make. Officers write dozens of these a day, and mistakes are routine. The contest process in most cities starts with a simple written statement, which costs nothing. You mail or submit your explanation with your photographs, and a reviewer either dismisses the ticket or upholds it, and if they uphold it, you can still request an in-person hearing. Plenty of tickets get dismissed at the written stage, sometimes on the evidence, and sometimes because the issuing officer never responds to the review at all. There's also a special category worth knowing called the correctable violation, the classic fix-it ticket. Citations for things like expired registration can often be dismissed entirely by fixing the problem, showing proof, and paying a small administrative fee of a few dollars instead of the full fine. People who live in vehicles contest tickets at a far higher rate than ordinary drivers, for the obvious reason that they have to, and their experience proves the point. The appeals process is real, it's free to start, and the deck is far less stacked than people assume. Remember Dale, the retired trucker from Phoenix I told you about at the top? His zero-ticket streak actually included 2 tickets. Both were written for overnight parking on a street where the restriction sign had been knocked flat by a delivery truck months earlier and never reposted. He photographed the bare signpost the same morning, mailed in a 1-page contest letter with the pictures, and both tickets were dismissed inside 3 weeks without him ever setting foot in a hearing room. Total cost, 2 stamps. That's why he counts his streak at 0. In his words, a dismissed ticket never happened. And that's the 5th door. Before I let you go, we need to talk about the mistakes, because a couple of these can undo everything the 5 methods just gave you. Mistake number 1, never, ever ignore a ticket. Remember the arithmetic from the beginning of this video. A $65 ticket that gets contested might cost you nothing. A $65 ticket that gets paid costs $65. A $65 ticket that gets ignored doubles, multiplies, boots the wheel, tows the van, and feeds the impound lot $80 a day until the vehicle is gone. Every path is survivable except silence. Mistake number 2, looking lived in. Parking enforcement in most cities is complaint-driven, meaning officers largely respond to phone calls from residents rather than hunting on patrol. What generates phone calls is a van that looks occupied, blankets pressed against glass, bins strapped to the roof, trash accumulating at the curb. The old hands use window covers that look like ordinary silver sunshades, keep the dashboard empty, and leave the curb spotless, and their vans generate no calls because there's nothing to call about. Mistake number 3, letting registration or insurance lapse. Expired tags are the first thing any officer checks, and in many cities, an expired registration transforms a routine parking situation into an immediate tow. The $60 renewal is the cheapest protection in this entire video. And mistake number 4, arguing at the window. If an officer or a property owner asks you to move along, you move politely, and you contest any paperwork later through the process I just described. Every vehicle dweller with years of ticket-free living says the same thing. The knock on the window is a conversation, not a citation, right up until somebody makes it one. Here's what I want you to remember. Parking enforcement looks like an arbitrary force of nature, a lottery of tickets that strike at random. It isn't. It's a written procedure, sitting in your city's municipal code, available at your public library and on your city's website, and the small group of Americans who were forced to learn it, the people living in the vans you drive past every day, stopped paying tickets almost entirely. The rules were never hidden. They were just never read. So here's the assignment. Sometime this week, look up your own city's code section on 72-hour parking. It'll take you 10 minutes, and you'll know more about parking law than 99% of the drivers in your town. If you learned something today, subscribe, because next week I'm showing you how people who live on the road legally get mail, banking, and even a driver's license without owning a house, and the address they use is something most people don't even realize is legal. I'll see you then.